I often went on business trips and could not see my beautiful wife for several weeks. And while I was away, I did not know at all what she was doing, who she was communicating with, and how she generally conducts her business. This had been going on for several years and everything seemed to be fine. Until one day I returned from another business trip and my wife invited me to dinner with her new friends, and the fact that I went there was my biggest mistake.
I'm nearly prepared. Give me 5. Haven't I heard the same thing about 10 minutes ago? Well, from my perspective, it could have easily been another 2 or 3 hours, and I wouldn't have minded. I had been away on a business trip for most of the week, returning home late the previous night, and the work day had been not just exhausting, but excruciating. So honestly, the idea of heading out to dinner with some friends of hers, whom I didn't even know, wasn't my top choice for that Friday evening. "Who are they again?" I shouted at her, hoping she could hear me from the living room while she was still in the upstairs bathroom. "Anne and Carl. I've mentioned her to you a few times. She's been my teammate all semester in my MBA classes," she replied. My wife Sabrina and I were both in our early 30s, married for just over 5 years. At 5'8", she was considered tall, with long blonde hair, big hazel eyes, and a perfectly fit body that attracted a fair amount of attention. While I didn't constantly have to fend off admirers, it wasn't uncommon for heads to turn when we went to the mall or strolled downtown. I suppose my 6'3" height and 250 lbs of rugby muscle served as a decent deterrent for hopeful admirers. "Okay, Kurt, I'm ready," she announced, coming down the stairs. She looked absolutely stunning, perhaps a bit too much. Her little black dress covered the essentials and not much more. Don't you think this is a bit, how should I put it, over the top for dinner with people we barely know? I know you're close with Anne, but you mentioned meeting her husband only once, and you barely shook his hand." The pressing question lingering in the recesses of my mind was, "Who are you, and where on earth is my wife?" She responded with a sly grin. "Not a fan?" I nonchalantly replied, "Yeah, sure." Sabrina had never been one for flirtation or provocation. In social settings, she typically listened, analyzed, and kept conversations to general and surface-level topics. It was highly unusual for her to choose a seductive, revealing dress for a dinner where alcohol and the likelihood of more intimate discussions were present. I didn't want to make a scene at the moment, but the peculiarity was enough to put me on edge. As it turned out, my unease was justified. Carl and Anne resided in a charming house across town. They warmly greeted us upon arrival. Anne's alluring red dress mirrored Sabrina's very little black dress, VLBD. I sensed some arousal in my discreet area, but being a gentleman, I didn't let it show. We raised a toast with the sparkling wine I had brought. Sabrina and Anne occupied a couch, engrossed in a discussion about the opportunities their MBA would bring. Carl, positioned near my wife, barely acknowledged their conversation. Attempts to engage him in discussion were futile. Evidently, his sole focus was my wife's legs, with a discretion comparable to a 747 taking off. The bustling activity allowed me the opportunity to observe my hosts more closely. Carl, of average height and build, appeared quite ordinary with his brown hair and 3-day beard, though I must admit, it was a pleasant kind of ordinary. Not exactly what I would call a people person, he seemed more inclined towards computers than human interaction, a trait fitting for an IT specialist. Despite his apparent lack of personality, aside from his admiration of feminine attributes, I couldn't say much more about him. In contrast, Anne exuded a vibrant and cheerful personality. Standing at 5'5" and weighing no more than 120 lbs, she possessed a fit and healthy figure. Her long, curly brown hair and subtle freckles added to her charming appearance, making her a solid 9.5/10. Dinner proved to be exceptional, with a perfect combination of food and wine. Anne and Sabrina dominated the conversation, with Carl occasionally interjecting jokes and puns that, to me, sounded a bit tacky, although the girls seemed to enjoy them. Despite my attempts to join in, I felt somewhat ignored. After returning to the living room, I found myself back in the same spot on the second couch, while the others settled on the first couch, with my wife seated between our hosts. Though I had decided to ease up on the wine, Sabrina continued to indulge with enthusiasm. It wasn't long before the conversation veered towards more intimate topics, and my wife seemed to relish every word. Carl complimented the way both women were dressed, asserting that my wife was justified in showcasing her perfect legs. I took the opportunity to agree, praising Anne's magnificent legs as well, but my comments went largely unnoticed. It appeared that the three of them were engrossed in their own little world. The conversation swiftly transformed into overt flirtation among the three of them. Despite my attempts to make my presence known, I was met with minimal acknowledgement. Growing increasingly irritated, I excused myself for a few minutes to visit the restroom. Upon returning to the living room, I was met with a shocking sight. Sabrina was practically entwined with Anne, and Carl had his hand beneath my wife's dress. Judging by her moans, it was evident what his fingers were up to. I was left utterly speechless. Before I could express my discomfort and suggest that Sabrina should leave, Anne ended their kiss, and all three promptly headed upstairs to their bedroom. Anne paused at the base of the stairs and casually waved at me, saying, "We're heading up to the bedroom. Are you coming?" She looked at me as if I were the oblivious one in the room. Too stunned to respond, I sat there as she sighed and ascended the stairs. I remained on the couch, utterly bewildered. Sabrina had never indicated any interest in incorporating others into our intimate life. Given our generally open communication and lack of taboos, I had assumed she was content with our relationship. While I was aware of people in my circle exploring swinging, group sex, or swapping, I had never considered it for myself. Clearly, Sabrina was light years ahead of me in contemplating such possibilities. I was still in disbelief as I witnessed Sabrina descending the stairs. Her dress was absent, replaced by a dressing gown. "Sabrina, what's happening?" "Oh, lighten up," she retorted. "Can't you drop the whole director Kurt Hollington act for a bit and join the fun?" "Loosening up won't hurt." I couldn't find an English word to convey my shock adequately. I felt completely numb. The sight and sound before me were surreal. My typically reserved and traditional wife stood there, partially undressed, ridiculing me for not eagerly participating in a sexual exchange party. I simply stared at her, unable to respond. I must have resembled a lifeless fish caught in a net. "Okay, Kurt, toughen up a bit. Are you coming, or should I ask Carl to step in for both of you?" she added, further adding to the absurdity of the evening. "What is all this nonsense?" I finally managed to ask, almost shouting at her. "You only live once, baby," she cheerfully replied. "Come on, join us and have some fun." She ascended the stairs into her friend's bedroom without a backward glance. I figured the next move was mine. Within 2 minutes I could hear laughter and moaning. I couldn't discern if it was Anne or my wife. I remained on the couch for a few minutes until I decided I'd endured enough. I silently rose and left. I was certain that after such intimacy, Sabrina would feel comfortable enough to request a ride home once the semi-private display of affection concluded. Upon awakening the following morning, the initial realization dawned on me that Sabrina's side of the bed remained unoccupied. A brief survey of the house confirmed that she hadn't taken refuge in the guest room or on the couch either. It was evident she hadn't returned home the previous night. A sense of dismay washed over me. Did she spend the night in the embrace of her lovers? Was it the inaugural occurrence of intimacy with either or both of them? Was she developing feelings for Carl? Or perhaps for Anne? One could never be certain. Was he a more satisfying partner than I? Despite my affection for her, I had always been able to perceive my wife's true nature. I had consistently considered her somewhat traditional and adherent to norms. She accused me of being rigid and stern last night. If she deemed me strict, it implied I must be the most uncompromising person imaginable. Was I? A part of me yearned for explanations, eager to mend the rift and restore a normalcy to my life. Simultaneously, The thought of confronting the woman who stood before me the previous night filled me with dread. That woman was not my wife. No, my wife would never have addressed me with such disdain. Reflecting on it now, I realize I should have been more vigilant. Sabrina began her MBA 2 years prior, where she crossed paths with Anne. Typically, Sabrina was effusive when discussing friends and colleagues she admired. She initially spoke about Anne at the start of the program. However, a few weeks after their meeting, Sabrina scarcely mentioned her. This was unusual, given the substantial time they spent collaborating on joint assignments. Evidently, there were aspects she preferred keeping hidden from me regarding Anne. It was increasingly apparent that the entire episode at Anne's the night before had been orchestrated, right down to the unusually provocative attire worn by both women and the excessively prolonged time it took for Sabrina to get ready. I was undeniably set up, and the realization of it made me nauseous. A few minutes past noon, I finally heard the front door unlock, leaving me on edge, unsure of which Sabrina I would encounter. She entered calmly. "You missed quite the party, Kurt." Her tone was neutral, and a faint hint of disappointment could almost be detected. "I'm sure you relished every moment," I replied, infusing as much sarcasm into my voice as possible. "Kurt, I'll never understand men. Anne is a stunning woman, more than willing to give you a memorable evening. Did you really have to act so thoughtlessly? Have you any idea how your immature behavior affected me?" Once again, I was taken aback by her shamelessness and complete lack of empathy. I sighed, purposefully conveying my disbelief at her obliviousness. I knew I had to be careful with my choice of words, avoiding raising my voice too much, or Sabrina might just shut down and leave for the rest of the afternoon. "Sab, did you notice that during dinner you and Anne spent the entire time engrossed in your own conversations and inside jokes? You would occasionally chuckle at Carl's shallow puns and comments, but did you realize you completely ignored me whenever I tried to speak? And then the three of you started making out on the couch, once again not acknowledging my presence. How can you possibly wonder why I wasn't attracted to a woman who treated me like a non-entity all evening?" "So, essentially, you were sulking?" she scoffed. I opted to disregard the comment. "By the way, how long had this swinging party been in the works? How many encounters did you have with them before last night? And why didn't you discuss it with me? When did I ever give you the impression that I'd be okay with sharing and swapping? Showing up with your supposed significant other at a swinging event without prior discussion is a blatant display of disrespect. When did you lose enough respect for me to subject me to that kind of situation?" Now I was furious. I could feel my face flushing red. "Okay, so your little ego got bruised. Do you want me to kiss it and make it all better?" she said in a tone resembling a mother talking to her 2-year-old. I stood up and headed to my den. She followed, sneering. "Tell me when you're done sulking like a toddler asked to share his toys, and when you're ready to act like an adult man." I slammed the door shut. I spent the afternoon exploring the internet for information on topics like wife swapping, swinging, threesomes, foursomes, and other related activities. Most of what I found was explicit content, but I stumbled upon some informative sites. Nevertheless, I felt it would be best to talk to someone experienced in the matter. Fortunately, I knew some people who fit the bill. Jacob, a former colleague with whom I used to get along, came to mind. He once mentioned his and his wife's unconventional hobby. It took some effort to find his phone number, but I eventually called him. After the usual long time no see and obligatory small talk, I gave him the condensed version of my situation. We agreed to meet for lunch on Monday. When I finally emerged from my den later in the afternoon, I noticed the note Sabrina had left on the kitchen table. "Gone to my sister's. I don't feel like enduring the silent treatment all afternoon." That worked out well for me. I headed to the nearby pub for a beer and a light dinner. Sabrina was at home when I returned around 9 p.m. She appeared to be her usual self and didn't bring up anything about the previous night or the earlier argument. I briefly considered sleeping in the guest room but decided against it, as I didn't want to provoke a morning dispute. I waited until she fell asleep before going to bed myself. Considering the little sleep she likely got at her friend's place the night before, it wasn't surprising that she turned in early. The household tasks and errands we had to handle on Sunday provided a much-needed break. She didn't seem inclined to talk, which suited me fine, as I intended to have a lunch meeting with my friend Jacob before addressing the looming issue between us. I departed from home on Monday before Sabrina even woke up. The morning passed without much excitement, and around 11:30, I left my office to rendezvous with Jacob. Jacob, a remarkably amiable individual, exuded an alpha male appearance, though his considerate nature disqualified him from fitting the typical alpha stereotype. Upon my arrival at the pub, he was already there, offering a warm greeting with his customary smile. After placing our orders, he swiftly delved into the main topic, probing for more details about the pivotal Friday evening. I provided him with a condensed version of the events, the reader's harder-to-digest edition. Jacob listened attentively, posing numerous questions, particularly regarding Sabrina's demeanor and attitude throughout the evening. "All right, Kurt, there's a multitude of issues here. The big question is, where do I start?" he exclaimed, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't have anything against swinging, actually. I've always been curious about it. But after what Sabrina did, I don't think I'm still interested," I admitted. "Of course you're not. You couldn't be. Kurt, you're right. She set you up. She cornered you. This is not how things are done," he exclaimed, almost disgusted. "Kurt, before Clara and I delved into the lifestyle, we had months of conversations about it. The conversation wasn't initiated by one of us already having a potential sex partner in mind. If you decide to swing, the most crucial person is your partner. You need to clearly understand what she wants, what she's comfortable with, and what her limits are. And the same goes for you, even if you're a guy. What difference does it make that I'm a guy?" I inquired. "Kurt, there's a common misconception that men will automatically be interested in swinging because it offers the opportunity to engage with multiple partners. However, not every guy is comfortable with this, and not everyone is okay with witnessing their spouse being intimate with someone else. What she did goes against the fundamental principles of the lifestyle. In my view, it demonstrated a complete lack of respect and consideration. Absolutely. I feel betrayed, cast aside, and overlooked. I wasn't shedding tears, but only because I was putting up a strong fight against it." Jacob noticed, and, in a genuinely warm yet masculine gesture, placed his hand on my arm, giving me a deeply understanding look. I was immensely grateful, and in that moment I couldn't help but wonder why Jacob and I had never become closer friends. We carried on our conversation during lunch. By the time we parted ways, things seemed much clearer, and I felt reassured that my supposedly inflexible stance wasn't the root cause of my current troubles. Most importantly, I now had a better understanding of how to navigate the impending discussion with Sabrina. Sabrina's team meetings at the office routinely occurred on Monday afternoons. Hence, it wasn't surprising that she wasn't home when I returned that day. I opted to order food, providing us with a chance to converse later. Around an hour after my arrival, Sabrina returned home in good spirits. Following dinner, I asked her to join me in the living room for a conversation. However, her mood drastically shifted to defensiveness upon realizing the discussion would revolve around her new hobby. "Sab, from my perspective, what happened last Friday was a clear case of cheating," I began. "What are you talking about, Kurt? I didn't cheat on you. You were well aware of the situation, and you chose not to participate when you were invited," she retorted. "I explained my reasons for not joining, Sabrina. Now, I'd like to better understand your perspective on this new life you want, especially why you never shared it with me." She sighed twice. "Kurt, as I said, you opted not to participate. I'm not going to put my life on hold because you're not interested in living yours. Friday night was a chance to let loose, have fun, and relive our teenage years. But you take everything so seriously that I question if you remember what fun means, she remarked, almost scoffing. All right, I can admit I've become a bit too serious lately, I conceded. A bit? Last Friday you were so uptight that I almost wanted to disappear, she exclaimed, this time with visible anger. Though I thought I was uptight because you ignored me and treated me poorly, I resisted engaging in this chicken and egg argument. Sab, if you intended to pursue this, why didn't you communicate openly with me? We could have discussed our preferences or boundaries. Boundaries are all you cling to, for heaven's sake. At that point, it became clear that the conversation wouldn't lead to anything productive. It seemed wiser to allow some time for things to settle before attempting another discussion. Sabrina began watching TV, and I retreated to my den. The following days showed a slight improvement in things. Surprisingly, Sabrina even shared a kiss with me before heading to work on Wednesday morning, a gesture that hadn't happened since the preceding Friday. I believed that, at the very least, the situation had ceased its downward spiral. However, my optimism was short-lived as Wednesday evening unfolded. Kurt, Anne contacted me this afternoon. She and Carl have extended an invitation for me to join them at their lake house for the weekend. It's approximately a 90-minute drive from here. And I assume you've already agreed? Yes, I have. Moreover, you're invited too. Anne and Carl are eager to get to know you better. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Sab, Anne only spoke to me to ask for the bread to be passed at the table, and Carl spent the entire time fixated on your legs, drooling like a Saint Bernard. I could have disappeared and they wouldn't have noticed. She refused to accompany me there. Regardless, since it seems like you're not willing to change your perspective, I informed her that I would go alone without a doubt. So yes, I'm going. With or without you, she declared defiantly. You told her that? You told her that I have my head stuck in my ass? In simpler terms, you ensured that I wouldn't join. How do you expect me to show up after you portrayed me in such enticing terms? Well, I'm not going to guide you there. I'm not your mother or your therapist. You either come or you don't. It's your choice. Sabrina, I don't want you to go. I want us to take the time to discuss all this before moving forward. Right now, I feel betrayed. You might think what happened last Friday was open, but I never agreed to it. And I feel like you betrayed my trust. I'm willing to forgive you, but I won't tolerate being insulted and ridiculed again. I'm not saying I never want you to see them again, or that we won't see them again, but we need to be on the same page before doing this again. Some steps were skipped, and I want us to do things right. Don't you think that's a reasonable compromise? I inquired. Kurt, I'm going. I haven't had a fun weekend in a long time. If it's so important, we can discuss it next week and the week after. But you won't make me miss out on some fun time. The conversation was clearly going nowhere, and fast. I decided that arguing was enough for that night, and that I needed to make a stronger statement the next day. I waited until Sabrina was asleep before going to bed. On Thursday, I left earlier than her. Upon returning home after work, I discovered she was busy in the kitchen preparing dinner. Unaware of my arrival, due to her engagement in a phone conversation on speaker, I recognized the voice to be Anne's. I informed Kurt that I might go, but I'm still undecided. I know he's upset, and I don't want to worsen the situation, she confided. Sab, I've told you. He'll come around. If he doesn't join you this weekend, I'll arrange to have lunch with him next week. Trust me, I can persuade him to change his mind. Men usually do, reassured Anne. I was taken aback. Well, I'm afraid next week might be too late, my wife responded. I would have liked to take him to lunch today, but Carl and I are already at the lake, getting everything ready. We should be a group of 6 couples. It's going to be a fantastic weekend, Anne exclaimed joyfully. Wait a minute, you said 6 couples? That's assuming Kurt changes his mind? Sabrina queried. I've already excluded your husband from the count, Sab. A good friend of Carl's will be there. Dan is a single guy, perfectly equipped to make a woman happy. Trust me, I've already put him through some quality control. Anne giggled. And if Kurt decides to join at the last minute? Sabrina asked. No problem at all. I'll call Susan, a single friend who'll be more than happy to join us too. Don't worry, Sab. Everything is sorted. Carl and I have been doing this for years. They continued chatting for a few minutes before Sabrina hung up. I was stunned. 6 couples. A single guy would be there as my substitute. I quietly returned to my car and drove away. I needed some time alone to contemplate it all. Not much time, to be honest. The choice was clear. Either she stayed home, and we could revisit the swinging discussion properly, or she went to the lake house, and I would initiate divorce proceedings. It was that straightforward. I returned home 30 minutes later. Sorry, Han. I got caught up in an endless meeting. Oh, that's fine, Kurt. I just finished dinner. Come in, everything's ready. Dinner proceeded as usual. She provided me with the extended version of her day, followed by an even lengthier account. I directed her to the living room with a glass of wine and took care of cleaning the kitchen. Later, I joined her in the living room, uncertain of where to begin. Eventually, she broke the ice, addressing the elephant in the room with a laugh. Kurt, have you made a decision about this weekend? I made up my mind yesterday, Sab. It remains unchanged. I want us to handle it the right way. She sighed, rose, and went upstairs. Deciding it was time for a stronger statement, I spent the night in the guest room. By Friday morning, I was already in the kitchen when she entered for coffee, appearing subdued. I waited for her to speak, hoping my absence from her bed the night before had made an impact. I'll finish work at 12 today, Kurt. I'll return here, finalize preparations, and leave around 1 p.m. If you decide to come, I'll be happy. If you're not here, I'll text you the address in case you change your mind. Sabrina, please don't go. Stay here so we can make things right, I pleaded. I had vowed not to beg, but I faced the potential end of my marriage. I told you I needed this. I am going, she replied with an oddly neutral tone. Sab, please don't prioritize your friends over your husband. I won't accept being pushed aside. I needed one last attempt. She glanced my way, sighed, rose from her seat, and headed off to work without a farewell, a kiss, or any gesture. Describing my Friday as unproductive would be an understatement. My motivation was akin to that of a jellyfish. By 12:30, I left the office and drove home, parking a few houses away. I waited as Sabrina exited our home just before 1 carrying an overnight bag, and drove off. Entering the kitchen to make coffee, I discovered a note on the table. See you on Sunday, my love. If you decide it's time to inject some joy into your life, come join us. Everyone will be thrilled to see you. If not, I look forward to sharing details of my weekend and teasing you about spending yours alone in a funk. Kisses, Sab. That was it. She had made her choice, favoring her friends over our marriage. The remainder of the afternoon was devoted to making plans and making phone calls. I heard from some mutual friends about the events following Sabrina's weekend return. Upon arriving home early on Sunday evening, Sabrina was taken aback to find the house deserted. She had anticipated my presence, hoping for a regretful me, contemplating my decision not to join her. She looked forward to sharing every detail of the weekend, perhaps throwing in some playful banter about the enjoyment they had, hoping to coax me into joining her next time. To her surprise, I had left a note on the kitchen table, precisely where she had left hers. Adjacent to the note was a small envelope. She began by reading the note. Sab, you've made your decision, and I must accept it. I warned you I wouldn't be ignored. I've initiated divorce proceedings. The papers will be served at home on Wednesday evening. If you need to reach me, contact my lawyer. His card is in the envelope. Kurt. Inside the envelope, she found the lawyer's card along with my wedding ring. Initially dismissing it as a tasteless joke, she decided to let me stew for a few days, thinking I would eventually come around. Throughout the weekend, Anne had reassured her, saying, Kurt will eventually go with the flow. However, when Sabrina entered our bedroom and discovered my side of the closet empty, with most of my personal belongings gone, she began to consider that she might have pushed things too far. She called Anne and expressed her concerns. Anne, in her wisdom, advised her not to worry, assuring her that I would eventually comprehend and agree to go along with her terms. Yeah, right. I had relocated my belongings to a small monthly rental apartment near my workplace. Although the house was rightfully mine, inherited from my parents, I chose not to compel her to move out, assuming it would simplify matters. Sabrina attempted to reach me twice on Monday and 3 times on Tuesday, but I purposely diverted all her calls to voicemail, heightening her concern. The process server was set to deliver the divorce papers officially on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Anticipating Sabrina's call between 6 p.m. and 6:15, I finally answered at 6:10, adopting a neutral tone. She was in tears, questioning the seriousness of the divorce. I am serious, Sab. I warned you. I wouldn't accept this, I replied. Distraught, she insisted. But I don't want a divorce, Kurt. Considering her emotional state, I couldn't resist a jab. Think about it, Sab. Maybe your lake house husband, what's his name? Oh yeah, Dan, will be happy to spend more time with you. I knew it was a low blow, but her reaction indicated it hit a nerve. How do you know about… she began, now sobbing. Attempting to maintain composure, she pleaded, Can we at least talk about it? Can you come over for coffee? After a brief pause and a sigh loud enough for her to hear, I reluctantly agreed. Okay, Sab. I'll be at the house around 7 p.m. tomorrow. See you. I hung up before she could respond, intending to give her time to compose herself. Meeting her was only for expressing my feelings, not to provide a shoulder to cry on. The following day I arrived at the house punctually. Sabrina had chosen to wear a delicate dress that she knew I favored, and she had applied fresh makeup, presumably to conceal the puffiness around her still red eyes. I'm glad you came, Kurt. There are so many things I want to explain. I'm sure you'll understand everything. I interrupted her immediately. She still didn't grasp it. Sabrina, I don't want to hear it. There's nothing more you can say about what you did. Your actions spoke volumes. But Kurt, I love you. I need you. I want you to be the father of my kids. You can't leave me. Her newly applied makeup now streaked down her cheeks. That's the issue, Sab. It's about what you want, what you need, what you feel like doing. What about what I want? Over the past few days, you've made it abundantly clear that my needs were just a minor inconvenience you swiftly brushed aside. I won't accept this. I may be firm and inflexible, but I'm not a loser. Oh, Kurt, I never thought you were a loser. I've always loved and admired you. I believed we were a strong couple. I just wanted to have a bit of fun last weekend and the week before. Nothing serious. No harm done. Anne was convinced that you would come around and join in. She says all guys eventually do. No harm done? Seriously, Sab, you just don't understand, do you? What you did is like comfortably sitting on a train with your friends, leaving me on the platform without informing me that you'd boarded. You let the train gain almost full speed and then mocked me because I couldn't run fast enough to catch it. And of course, you never bothered to ask if I was interested in the destination. Is that what you call love and consideration? Is that your idea of a couple? For the first time, she found herself at a loss for words. And no, I am not willing to forgive and forget. Your recent actions went beyond mere physical encounters with others. They revealed a willingness to dismiss and belittle me if it served your interests. I had an inkling that you were capable of such behavior, but I never thought you would direct it towards me. I refused to spend the rest of my life with someone who could treat me this way. Tears streamed down her face as she continued, her hands covering her eyes. As for what Anne told you, how can you rationally believe that a woman who exchanged only a sentence and a half with me understands my perspective better than I do myself? You chose to heed her words over mine, once again placing her above me. I won't accept that, Sabrina. Her expression now reflected defeat. Please sign the papers. You'll find the terms quite fair. Secure another place to stay before the end of next month. I rose and departed, just in time to prevent my own tears from falling. Sabrina did not contest the divorce. 6 months later, everything was finalized and concluded. 4 years later, my wife Cheryl and I, married for 3 years, were enjoying drinks with our close friends Jacob and Claire on the covered terrace of a renowned swinging resort in the Caribbean. Cheryl had her hand in mine when I overheard a familiar voice simmering behind me. "You're nothing but a hypocrite." "Well, hello there, Sabrina. How have you been?" I responded with a sardonic grin. "Are you his new wife or girlfriend?" Sabrina inquired of Cheryl. "Did he tell you he divorced me because he refused to swing? What a deceitful, two-faced jerk." Cheryl looked at her disdainfully. "You were right, Kurt," Cheryl remarked. "She simply doesn't understand."
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!